Hey there, everyone. Rambling Collector here, and welcome back to another podcast episode. So, I noticed it's been a while since I've done a Real Talk video, and for those of you who have followed this channel for a while or who are completely new here, let me explain about that. So, my Real Talk series initially started off as something where I talk about something related to real life, and give my personal thoughts on it, whether it's something related to depression, or burnout, or even just my current thoughts on society today. But now it has evolved into other things such as either book haul videos, or even at the very least, he's talking about one of my favorite elements in literature, or even just a regular old tag video for BookTube. So, with that being said, I noticed it's been a while since I've done one of these, so I thought I'd have a little fun with this one, and use this time to talk about one of my favorite tropes in literature and media in general, and that is my love for the villainous protagonist. So with that being said, let's get started. So first of all, let me just give a basic definition here. The definition of a villainous protagonist is a protagonist or point of view character who acts as the main villain of the story. And unlike a typical anti-hero, they have very little to no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Now, some of my personal reasons for liking this particular type of character is that 1. It provides a nice change for the typical story formula, providing a unique point of view that provokes questions of morality, as well as allows the reader to engage in a much darker form of storytelling that you wouldn't normally see. Number 2. Oftentimes, some of these characters can have very real or human motivations, which can provide the reader with a chance to connect with the character in some way, while also leaving the question of whether you want to root for the protagonist to succeed in their goals, or if you wish to see them fall. And finally, number 3. Villains can sometimes be a lot more fun to read about than heroes, especially when they are the main character of their own story. Now, as we continue, I want to provide 3 main examples that come to mind of villainous heroes or villainous protagonists in that sense. And for me, this always provides like a nice change of pace, especially because some of the stories can be very engaging and very fun to read about. But these are just 3 main examples. So with that being said, let's move on to example number 1. First up, we have Tanya de Gurachov from Saga of Tanya the Evil. So this is a series I've actually followed for a while, and I've currently read up to book 8 on the series. However, I still have books 9 and 10 to follow up on, which I really need to get on those sometime soon. But to explain about Tanya here. So after a near-death encounter with God, or as they called him, Being X, where they fervently denied their existence, they are reincarnated into an alternate world plagued by warfare, but they are consistently placed on the front lines while having to fight being brainwashed into a mindless fanatic. Now that is a very run-of-the-mill way of putting it, but to put it simply, Tony de Gurachov is the main character who has the mind of a middle-aged Japanese salaryman and who worked in the human resources, who has now been reincarnated into the body of a young, blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl and placed into what is essentially alternate world Germany during the time of World War I. Now, in this world, they essentially have things such as magic, for instance, where they can cast very powerful spells, as to either promote them to be able to fly or commit high explosive rounds, things like that. But the reason for the brainwashing part is because they have a very personal beef with God, or Being X as they call them, and because of this, Being X is going to try everything to convert Tanya into a religious fanatic or a believer. And as such, one of the main things they did is that they corrupted her power gem to where she can only use it if she commits a prayer, which to the outsider can make her seem like a very religious person, but in reality she has to do this, or else she will not have the ginormous power or that she generally needs in order to survive the war. That being said, every time she does use it, she feels like she is slipping more and more, using it more like a drug in a sense. She becomes addicted to that rush of feeling of power that is granted every time she prays. And as such, she can feel her free will being slowly stripped away every time she uses it. So she's damned if she doesn't use it, and she's damned if she does, quite simply. But one of the things I've noticed about Tanya, outside of the main TV show that she's in, is that in the books, we dive more into her personal mindset. And Tanya has a very gray morality due to sociopathic and psychopathic tendencies. And this is exemplified by her tendencies to view some actions that others would find extreme as completely necessary. And while she is seen as a hero at times, she is more often seen by her comrades as an absolute wild card that needs to be watched. So for instance, more often than not, Tanya is the point of view character that we see this entire series plan out from. Though occasionally we will get snippets from some of her crew members whom she fights alongside with, or even some of her commanding officers. And all of them agree she is very off the table with her thinking. She's more than willing to thrust people into the front lines, and even if they are very, very underprepared, as a way to kind of sharpen them into a main fighting force that she wants to use to be able to survive. And Tanya constantly says that they are pacifistic in nature, that they crave peace in a way. However, more often than not, we see how, despite this, she's more than willing to commit war crime level acts, such as attacking an enemy capital and provoking retaliation, or even killing innocent civilians who are trying to run or flee the battlefield. And we see this played throughout. And I will say, Tanya's characterization here was very interesting to me. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, it kept me wanting to read more to see how this particular character was going to survive everything being thrown at them. And in some cases, I could argue that the ends would justify the means for them, because all they're trying to do is simply survive to the end of the war. So they have to commit more and more worse actions or put themselves further on the line in order to make sure that they will have that chance to survive. All in the meantime, suffering some of the most dangerous battlefields in this entire universe. And it made it very fascinating for me, because on one hand, you want to root for Tanya to be able to at least survive, but you also know some of the actions that she takes are absolutely deplorable. So it leaves you really wondering, how far would one person go if they were in a war zone? What sacrifices would they be willing to make in order to simply improve their chances of survival? How far would they be willing to push the others around them? It's a great question, and honestly, if you haven't checked out this series, I would highly recommend it, especially if you're in the mood for some good military fiction pieces. Now, let's move on to our next example. Next up, we have Quinn from the Dead Souls series. Now, his entire character novel, which I have reviewed on this channel, as well as all the other works by this author, his entire character novel paints the picture of an abuse victim finally being given the chance to strike back at his abusers after being turned into a vampire and leading an army in a war against werewolves. So, however, throughout the series, he is shown to take great pleasure in not only killing humans for sustenance, but also for the chance to take pleasure from their pain. Yet despite slowly regaining his humanity due to his relationship with Rianne in the main Dead Souls series, he still has a long way to go. Such as his road to recovery really starts in Book 2, and we know at the end of this he's going to have a long way to go before he can ever view himself in a positive light, or even just to be able to value the lives of other humans. He values those he considers his close family, such as his brother Lucas, or even just Rianne especially, whom he views as his other half and practical soulmate. But he has this controlling personality. He wants to keep them at arm's length while also holding on to them tightly. He wants to be able to be in command and is not willing to relinquish control of anything, because all his life he's not had control of it, ever. He's constantly been told what to do by his abusive parents, but as such, now he finally has that chance, and in some cases he has adapted some of his father's worst personality traits. But I will say his character novel was definitely a hard thing to read at times, because you really do feel for this character. I'm going to say that right now. And even though he can be painted as a sympathetic character after learning of his backstory, there's still no denying that a lot of his actions can be seen as villainous, and some of you may argue that he had to learn how to be that way. And yet, in Dead Souls, we could see that he does take great pleasure in the suffering of others. Like, he will drain their blood for sustenance, but he will take your time with you. He will take his time to, at the very least, make sure that you are in the worst possible agony. He will antagonize you and torment you with words and actions until you are literally a spattering, mumbling, bubbling mess of a person by the end of it. And in some cases, that can be hard to read about, especially for those of you who have more of a sensitive palate when it comes to torture like this, or especially if you have a sensitive palate to anything dark like what goes on in this series. But I will say, this makes Quinn a very interesting character, as he is, in some cases, a point of view character. Yet other times we also see him through the eyes of others and how his actions can affect those around him. All in all, though, he makes for a very interesting villainous protagonist, and I really hope to see more of his character throughout the series as it grows. But now, let's move on to my final example here. The Night Lord's Legion from Warhammer 40,000. So for those of you who follow this channel for a while, you will know that I'm a massive fan of this franchise, and have reviewed quite a few books on this channel in relation to Warhammer 40,000. And believe me, I haven't even scratched the surface of my collection at this rate. But one of my favorite omnibuses that I've recently reviewed was The Night Lords by Aaron Dembski-Bowden. If you want to check that out, I will leave a link for you all to check that out. So here we have the Night Lords Legion, known as the 8th Legion in Warhammer 40,000. A literal army of gangsters, murderers, and criminals given super soldier abilities. And let me tell you guys, they are not afraid to do horrible things to their enemies as well as those under their command. And by horrible things, I mean torture of the highest degree, such as broadcasting screams planet-wide to instill fear in their victims, peeling the skin off of people and wearing flayed skin cloaks, taking pleasure in their fear and pain, and stalking them through the night. It's sort of like very evil space Batman, if you really want to get technical about it. Picture an army of Batman-like figures who do not have his moral compass. Picture that, and you'll realize that is terrifying. And yet, despite this, some of the characters within this faction do have a sense of honor and pride, choosing to remain on the fringes of the galaxy committing piracy rather than pledging allegiance to demonic powers. And that is one of the main things that I like here. They see how badly all the other legions have been affected by pledging their souls to demonic powers of hell. And yet they choose to remain pure and righteous in what they consider as their personal revenge, because the Night Lords themselves were the outcasts of all the Space Marine legions. They were seen as the most deplorable, disgusting legion and the antithesis of everything a Space Marine needs to be. Not all of them were these honorable warriors who were willing to fight and die on the front lines. These guys were cowards, stalkers in the middle of the night, preferred to torture their victims and take pleasure in it rather than commit themselves on the front lines. And it shows in their behaviors. They will fall back if necessary, or play mind games with their enemies, and will do everything they can simply to survive. The Night Lord's Omnibus really painted a very great picture of seeing these people whom you know are the villains. And yet in some cases you can't help but root for them. When they're dealing with internal conflicts against either others within their legion or outside forces, who are apparently trying to screw them over in every sense of the word, you can't help but want these guys to succeed in some way or take some payback from those who are trying to mess with them. And honestly, I loved following the characters of the Night Lords series, specifically First Claw. Their struggles to simply either survive or the actions they committed, yes, they were deplorable. But when you read their backstories and where they came from, you can almost understand where they're coming from. And yet, even then, there's nothing like a good villainous protagonist. And these guys are definitely villainous. Do not let some of their moral conduct fool you. They will not hesitate to either skin you alive if you so much as look at them funny. If you disrespect them in any way, they will take great pleasure in putting the fear of God back into you. And yes, this I feel is another great example of that. These right here are peak villainous protagonists in my opinion. But with that being said, let's move on to some random thoughts here. So, to put it simply with the villainous protagonist, let's put it this way. I have read a lot of books that either have a very gray morality, or in some cases very bright, with the power of friendship, specifically with anime and manga. And I will admit, I dive into some very dark subject matter on this channel, specifically with what kinds of literature I read. Though I do sometimes crave much lighter pieces of fiction to at least cleanse my palate and make sure that I don't become extremely depressed as to withdrawn after reading some of the stuff I do. All in all, though, reading a villainous protagonist, seeing how far they're willing to go, what compromises they'll have to make what sacrifices they're willing to put on the table, how they interact with others. There's so much more I could dive into on this. And to me, I also want to hear your guys' thoughts on this. What are some of your favorite villainous protagonists? And some of the ones that I didn't mention before, such as Light Yagami from Death Note. I feel like he's been talked about enough to death, but I will say this much. When I was first getting into anime and manga, Light Yagami specifically was a very fun character to me because his actions were absolutely deplorable, and yet on some level I wanted him to be able to outsmart all of his opponents and win. Nowadays I realize that further down the line, at the tail end of the series, he really was becoming, much more of a villainous character, and it's one thing to follow when he has a rival to try that he wants to succeed against. And yet in this case, by the end of the series, I really wanted to see him fall. Like, there are some villainous protagonists whom you want to see die in horrible ways. You want them to not succeed because of just how deplorable they are. Some of them you do, some of them you don't. And like Yagami, when I first started, I did want him to succeed. But towards the tail end of the series, I really wanted to see his downfall. By the end of it, I'm sorry, I really did. But to me, that's what makes the villainous protagonist fun. It's an absolute coin flip of whether or not you either want to see them succeed, and in some cases it really makes you question your own morals. Such as, if you were put in this situation, would you be able to do what these characters do? Would you really be able to go through some of the things that they do? Would you be able to maintain your own moral code? Would you be able to make the sacrifices necessary? It's a constant question that you will have to ask yourself. And quite frankly, that makes it fascinating in my honest to God opinion. But with that being said, I figured it's about time I go ahead and close out this video. So for those of you who have stuck around, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you all enjoyed this fun little real talk. And if you want to see more of the other stuff that I've talked about, whether it's real life topics or even some literature based ones, I'll leave a link to the playlist for my real talk videos. You'll see here at the tail end of this video. Or if you want to see some of the other books that I've talked about on this channel, I will leave a link to that playlist as well. And if you like this little podcast episode, please feel free to let me know your thoughts down below. Oh, if you have your own favorite villainous protagonist, I'm very curious and I want to know more. What are your thoughts on the examples that I provided? Or do you have someone better that you would want to discuss with me down in the comment section down below? And once again, thank you all so much for listening. It really means a lot if you stuck around to the end of this video. And if you have any suggestions for any future Real Talk videos, please feel free to let me know that as well. I'm more than willing to take considerations, and I will be more than happy to look at the subject. Once again, thank you all for listening. This is Rambling Collector, signing off for now, and I will see you all in the next video. Have a great day, fellow readers.